Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. I want to say a special hello to Ron and Victoria, my good friends from America. They're co-teachers, and I love them very much. And thank you for showing up today. It means a lot to me. So very good. So I want to talk about my favorite subject, which is called intersubjective non-duality. And this is really the essence of everything that I've been teaching for about 35 years. And I never get tired of speaking about it. But particularly as of late, as the last couple of months, I have been having some profound experiences of shared ecstatic unity with some students of mine, which have startled me in the feelings, in the deep feelings of the intensity of kind of non-dual bliss, oneness, not two-ness between me and them. And it's made such a renewed impact on me that I wanted to speak about it again and try to speak about it in a new way. So as everybody knows, I'm speaking in a context in which we're speaking about enlightenment, which is the awakening to the ultimate context of existence, of existential existence. And the ultimate context is the revelation of non-duality or oneness, or I like to describe it in this way. I like to say that the ultimate nature of reality includes everything that exists and everything that does not exist. And I like to use this term, everything that exists and everything that does not exist, as a metaphor for the absolute principle, or the God principle. So I like to say that, and maybe we could agree that the fact that the God principle, or the absolute principle, we could call the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist, is the absolute principle, of the God principle. And of course, we can have an intellectual grasp or cognizance of what that means, but I'm speaking about something different. I'm speaking about the experiential feeling, the experiential knowing, the experiential vibration, the knowing and the cosmic vibration, which is a particular kind of spiritual feeling, an ecstatic feeling or current of energy that that we awaken to when we awaken to this dimension of non-duality or oneness. That is, of course, the foundation of the totality of all of reality, and it's a felt vibration. It's a particular kind of feeling. And to use traditional language, it's a feeling of unconditional, radical, and unimaginable liberation and freedom and happiness and joy. It's the revelation of the one that is not two, that liberates us from fear and doubt and confusion and anxiety, and most important of all, ignorance as to our true nature. So this kind of awakening, this is the awakening that the Buddha was speaking about. This is the awakening that the great Ramana Maharshi was speaking about. This is what seekers after enlightenment are hoping they're going to find sooner or later one day on their path. But it's an inner revelation, and it's a revelation that usually occurs with the private and very intimate, personal, subjective dimension of our self. It's an inner experience. It's considered to be an inner experience, and one that is uniquely personal in the fact that it is absolutely subjective. And in this experience of that which is absolutely subjective, we experience, or we discover, that the interior of the universe, the inner dimension of reality, or the interior of the whole universe, the withinness of the universe, has a particular unique quality to it, a mysterious quality. And that quality is consciousness. Consciousness feels like absolute subjectivity. And to use the language of Ken Wilber in integral philosophy, it's the considered to be the interior of the exterior of the universe. It's the inside of the whole universe. Feels like the inside of the whole universe feels like me. Not, doesn't feel like the story of my personal identity, but it feels like what I feel like. It's the vibration of the I am, or the I feeling. The feeling of I that vibrates and pulsates beneath our personal identity, our notion of a separate self, but pulsates right underneath that is a feeling of existence. It's a feeling of existence, it's a vibration of life. That is who I really am. That is who I am. That's who we all are. And it feels like something to exist. I'm not talking about what it feels like to exist as being Andrew or Ron or Victoria, because they all have their own personal stories. But I'm speaking about what it feels like to exist, the feeling of being, the feeling of existence itself. Pure being, pure existence feels like me. It feels like the I that is at the source of my experience. And when we awaken to the mystery of who we really are, the mystery of being, myself, we realize that the ground of in the ground of reality, and in the ground of this mysterious vibration of me, there's a quality of timelessness. And most importantly, and more importantly, there is the revelation of eternity. We recognize in this kind of awakening that this awakening to absolute subjectivity, or the source of the I sense, if we penetrate very deeply into it and begin to scrutinize it and analyze it and pay attention to it, we'll notice that its nature exists prior to time itself. And most importantly, we recognize that the source of this I sense, or the source of the feeling of being, has an eternal ground to it. That's where the feeling of the recognition of the eternal nature of the source of the self is discovered. And that's the beginning of the awakening to enlightened awareness, when we realize it, and experientially and directly, in a way that is profound and absolute, that the source of the self, in a way that the mind cannot cognize or understand, is eternal. That's why the Buddha called the self, in his language, he called it the unborn, that which is unborn or uncreated. That which Ramana Maharshi called the self. So the unborn and the uncreated, or the self that Ramana was speaking about, its nature, the quality of its vibration is the vibration of eternity, of birthlessness and deathlessness. And so when we experience this directly, when we discover this for ourselves, we experience a profound liberation from time and history and our ego's endless preoccupations and fears. And that is always a glorious moment. And we pursue this more deeply, we discover that there's only one I in the whole universe. The essence of Vedanta tells us that I am that, and that there's only one I in the whole universe, and that is the I that we all experience ourselves as being. It's the same sense of I that the cat experiences, or the dog experiences, or the bee or the fly experiences, or the snake or the elephant, or the fish in the sea experiences, without knowing it. Most animals don't have any capacity for self-reflective awareness, so they experience the I sense without being aware of the fact that they're having that experience. And only human beings, it seems, have this mysterious capacity to recognize and realize the experience of subjectivity, or consciousness, and within its capacity for self-reflective awareness. So the universe wakes up to itself in and through this capacity for self-reflective awareness. And when we awaken to enlightened awareness, it's the revelation of this one without a second. I am that one without a second, and we all are that one without a second. But once again, it's one thing to have an intellectual recognition or understanding of this level of Dharma or spiritual philosophy. But it's another thing to have the experience itself directly. And we have the experience directly through, it's only one way it happens. Everybody already knows what that is. It's by transcending the mind, by transcending the mind, transcending time. The vibration of being itself, the feeling of being, speaks to us in a different language, not the language of words or thoughts or cognition. It's the language of knowing, transcendental insight, transcendental revelation. And there's a mysterious waking up that happens that's not cognitive. It includes cognition, but it transcends it absolutely. So it's in the knowing of being that we awaken to this mysterious dimension of the that I'm calling eternal. And that's the revelation of enlightenment. Now, as I've been saying for many years now, this revelation, this kind of awakening has universally been considered to be in a private, uniquely subjective event that happens within the subjective experience of the unique self of you and me. And in this context, we awaken to when we awaken to this one without a second, to the ultimate I. There is a revelation of the non-relative or absolute nature of the self. We awaken to a different dimension of reality, a different dimension of existence itself. And this is the flip from relative reality to absolute reality, or relative cognition to absolute cognition, from relative knowing to absolute knowing. It's when we suddenly are seeing everything that seems to be happening in the relative universe from a mysterious place that exists way beyond it and always free from it. And the Tibetans in their philosophy have made it clear to us that the relative dimension of reality is very different than the absolute dimension of reality. They're two discrete dimensions of reality, one of which is relatively real and the other which is absolutely real. And they warn us not to confuse relative reality with absolute reality, because they are unique and distinct. And enlightenment happens when we awaken to the non-relative or absolute dimension of being or existence or knowing. And once this is something that you've realized very deeply, if you have realized it deeply, it's a big question. How deeply have we realized it? But if it's something we've realized very deeply, if we realize it deeply enough to acknowledge that the significance of this revelation of non-relative or absolute reality has greater significance than anything that could ever appear in relative reality, then a shift takes place. A shift of identity from a relative small self and its endless worries and problems and issues to a deeper non-relative or absolute dimension or context for our existence. And if we have very good spiritually cultivated karmas, if we're lucky, if we have good spiritual momentum that is helping to propel us forward, we're able to make a transition. We're able to make a transition and to become stabilized and having access to enlightened awareness. This happens very rarely. Many people wake up very briefly, but they usually fall back asleep again. Some people, because they have very good karmas, maybe have been at it for many lifetimes, I don't know. are able to let go of their attachment to relative reality and become stabilized in an absolute non-relative perspective. So, getting back to what I was saying at the beginning of my talk, the bliss and the joy and the ecstasy of enlightened awareness of the revelation of one that is not two is because at an experiential level of feeling and of spiritual vibration and of knowing, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. I can only say it's what it's like to know everything. But by knowing everything, I don't mean knowing this and knowing that and also knowing the other thing. It means as if everything that seems to exist as being separate was all recognized to be one, it would be the feeling, the feeling or the vibration of the feeling of coherence. If everything that existed appeared to be separate, including all the planets and galaxies in the universe, and all the atoms and quarks in our bodies, we're suddenly seen and recognized as all being non-separate, or part of a metaphysical, grand, inconceivable coherence, a great coherence. And if this coherence was the vibration of the energy and intelligence that gave rise to the whole thing in the first place, that coherence, that which coheres everything that appears to be separate, as a lived and felt experience, is what it's like to have an experience of God consciousness as absolute principle. So this absolute principle, as an experience of revelation, is the experience of this fundamental coherence or non-duality in relationship to everything that appears to exist as being separate. So if nothing that exists is being seen as separate anymore, but it actually is seen as being non-separate. Again, not as an intellectual understanding, but as a feeling, as a vibration. It's a feeling of coherence, a feeling of oneness. So the feeling of oneness, or the feeling of coherence, or the vibration of oneness, the vibration of coherence, is peace. That peace that passes all understanding, unimaginable joy, ecstasy, indescribable freedom, is the nature of that coherence that exists at all times, in all places, through all circumstances, everywhere, always. So it's the revelation of this coherence that is the oneness that liberates. Now, as I've been saying, usually this experience of oneness, this revelation of oneness, is experienced as the subjective experience of one unique individual. But when this conscious awareness of the absolute coherence, that's the ultimate nature of everything that exists and everything that does not exist, is recognized by two people at the same time at the level of revelation, and what I'm trying to say is that most of us, most spiritual seekers or sincere seekers, I'm speaking about people who are sincere here, the most sincere spiritual seekers are very interested in the kind of experience I've been describing to you. That's why they meditate, they go to see spiritual teachers, they read spiritual books, they go on retreats, and they do all kinds of things that help us to get closer to God. But for most people who are very sincere about this process of awakening, their relationship to their own potential for unconditional freedom is usually relative, is usually partial. It's usually like, I want to be free and I want to be one with the absolute, but I also want other things. So when and of course a realizer, a spiritual realizer is someone in whom the relationship to this absolute possibility is unconditional, and there's no division anymore left in the self, and the self is completely undivided in its relationship to liberation, to enlightenment, to the absolute principle, to the God principle. So in such an individual, there's no duality in their relationship to God anymore. This absolute principle, this God principle, is what they live for, choicelessly, and because they know who they really are, and they're not divided about it. There's no division left in the self anymore, not fundamentally. So when I remember the title of my first book was called My Master is Myself. I still love that title. But that statement, which came from out of nowhere, that title, My Master is Myself, is expressing the same truth that I've been trying to explain for the last few minutes. So when two human beings who are unconditionally committed, without reservation, without hesitation, without holding anything back, to this absolute principle, to the promise of enlightenment, to the evolution of consciousness, to the liberation of all sentient beings. When there's an unconditional commitment to that end, and that unconditional commitment is being shared by two people, a certain kind of miraculous coherence begins to appear between these two individuals. And then that coherence is a felt vibration of love. Of course, what else could it be? It's a coherence of love, but it's non-dual love. It's not personal love. It's absolute love. It's not relative love. It has no personal dimension to it. And it has a particular kind of vibration, this kind of coherence I'm speaking about. And it's the other half. I mean, just to put it in some understandable way, it's when enlightenment is shared, when the experience of enlightened awareness and the vibration of enlightened awareness is shared at the highest and deepest level of the heart between two apparently separate individuals. And when this kind of coherence is being experienced, it's unbearably sweet and indescribably fulfilling. And of course, whenever human beings experience coherence, they experience some form of ecstasy or some form of joy. So, for example, if you were mountain climbers, I suppose, experience coherence as they're climbing up the mountain together on a good day and enter into a flow state. Or great jazz musicians experience ecstasy when they're into a flow state in the process of improvisation. We know that lovers who fall deeply in love with each other experience a deep state of flow and coherence as they fall in love, personal love with each other. So we can experience all kinds of coherence. Sometimes it's not, sometimes coherence occurs in ways that are not so sweet. For example, if you ever seen films of the Nazi rallies in Nuremberg, there was a kind of terrifying coherence that the Nazi followers were experiencing between them. We can experience all kinds of feelings of coherence when we do things together. But I'm speaking about something very specific, and it's the coherence that emerges between two or more people when they're actually becoming conscious or being conscious to the highest principle that exists in the universe, which is this absolute principle, this non-relative principle. The experience of the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist as a vibration, as a feeling of being. So when the experience of coherence comes from the shared experience of that, it's the highest level of an experience of intimacy and non-dual oneness and love that two people could ever experience. And this is different than, it's different than the profound experience of non-dual freedom that we can experience within our own true self. When we awaken to the true self, what's called the true self, we realize there is no other. There's only I am that. There is no other. There's only one I in the universe, and that is who I am. That's who I've always been. And I know it. Most people don't know that, but for one who knows it, it changes everything. But when we experience this kind of the kind of recognition I've been describing, when it's being shared between two living, conscious, sentient beings, in the context of this shared self-reflective awareness, that I am you and you are me. There's a quickening or kind of an intensifying of the vibration of unity, which can be quite overwhelming in its ecstatic nature and intoxicating. And as I've been saying, is the highest form of love I think that's possible to experience. It means I love. It means I love you completely. But I don't love you completely because of who you are. I love you completely because you're me. And you love me completely because I am you. It's hard to explain. It's a kind of love that is absolute. And as far as the human experience is concerned, it answers every possible question we could have and delivers us every experience of joy we could imagine would be possible. Now, I want to mention what I said the other day when I was trying to just describe this to a group of people. In this kind of coherence I'm describing, this is when the absolute reality and relative reality temporarily experience an absolute coherence. So when absolute reality and relative absolute existence and relative existence absolutely cohere. And this is when things can't get any better, as far as I know. So in this absolute coherence that I'm describing, when absolute reality and relative reality come together miraculously, in a way that's extraordinary, profound, and so unbelievably liberating and intoxicating. Heaven indeed comes to earth, and heaven itself becomes manifest here on earth. Heaven, of course, is just a state of consciousness. It's a higher state of consciousness. But the fact of heaven always implies manifest reality, manifest existence. Because if there's going to be a heaven, there's got to be the opposite, which is either earth or hell. And I say this because the manifest expression of the absolute principle as heaven that I'm trying to describe is very different, because in the uniquely subjective awakening to non-duality, one transcends the whole notion of heaven and hell. One experiences pure isness that transcends any form of duality whatsoever. So in that state of consciousness, there's no difference between the manifest and the unmanifest, existence and non-existence, being or becoming. It all becomes one. And in that one where there's not two, there's no relationship anymore, because there's only one, which is the deepest experience of enlightened awareness that one can have. But in that, there's only one and not two. But in the kind of enlightenment I'm describing, or the expression of enlightened awareness that I've been describing, there's definitely at least two. And this is in this coherence between heaven and earth, between the manifest and the unmanifest, between heaven and earth. There's the relative nature of the manifest dimension of reality begins to reflect the blazing light of the absolute, or the absolute principle, or the God principle itself. That's why the light becomes so blinding, because then relative reality is consumed in the brightness of its own absolute nature. Even as the relative dimension of relative reality does not disappear, it's still it's still a human body there, and a human personality and a relative mind. But the relative mind, body, and personality now becomes begins to reflect the energy and the radiance of its absolute nature in the context of relatedness. And that's why that's the context in which manifest heaven actually emerges. So in the non-dual enlightenment, that's just about the awakening and the subjective nature of the unique individual. That's about radical transcendence of body, mind, world, universe, as I've been saying. So when we transcend everything, there's nothing left. And that's unconditional freedom. So what I'm describing is a different expression of enlightened awareness that it's all about creating heaven, or awakening to heaven, or giving rise to the context in which heaven exists, which is manifest. Heaven is a manifest expression of reality. It means it enters into existence. It's a place. It's a state of consciousness, but it's also a place. It's a place. It's a space. It's a dimension of reality. It's a higher state. It comes into existence. It becomes manifest. And when heaven becomes manifest, it offers us struggling sentient beings an opportunity to truly live a divine life, or what's been called a divine life. I think the great Sri Aurobindo called it, those who would attempt to do such a thing, noetic beings. And this is when we would strive to live the life of the awakening to enlightened awareness at the highest level. And the highest level, of course, would have to be a heaven realm. It's where we want to restart the human project. Seems to be in so much trouble these days. But we want to restart the human project on the highest ground that actually exists in manifest reality, which would we have in itself. And we can't strive spiritually or have a higher spiritual aspiration than that. It's like, it would be like metaphorically climbing up Mount Everest and not just touching the peak and then beginning our descent, but once we get up there, then we set up shop and try to recreate the human experiment up there based on the most enlightened spiritual values that come from that reveal themselves to us in these highest states of spiritual revelation. And then heaven becomes the ground upon which we begin to give rise to the human project in a whole new way, with other people who are as unconditionally committed to this highest possibility as we are. So try and imagine if the experience of radical coherence, the radical coherence I'm trying to describe to you, try to imagine that if the experience of radical coherence and the vibration of radical coherence and the liberation of radical coherence was not just merely a temporary touchstone in your spiritual life. In other words, let's say that it was not merely a momentary experience that you glimpsed every now and then in the midst of swimming in a samsaric sea of fear and ignorance. But it became the very ground upon which you were living and trying to build a new possibility for all sentient beings, ideally in the universe, to speak in a grandiose, mythic sort of way. It's a different kind of life based upon different kind of aspiration, based upon a radical commitment to human evolutionary potential, the liberation of our spiritual potential as evolving human beings. This is not merely a kind of an improvement project. It's reaching for the stars, reaching for the sky. It's kind of what I'm pointing to. But I hope that's clear. I hope that's clear, especially the notion that heaven is an expression of manifestation. That heaven may be a state of consciousness, but it's also a manifest expression of higher reality. It's part of the creative potential of the cosmos at the highest levels of consciousness. Nothing could be more exciting. Just try to imagine if radical coherence was the place we started from. It wasn't the place we were shooting for, but it was the place we always started from. Imagine if we were so spiritually developed. Imagine if we were all so spiritually developed. The radical coherence became the place we started from, and not ended up in, hopefully at the end of the show, but radical coherence was where we started from. Try to use your spiritually inspired imagination to consider where we could go. We could create a completely different world together, a world that most people can't even begin to imagine. So the letting go, so you can see the letting go that would need to be involved for to embark on such endeavor would be quite profound, because any resistance, any holding back for the small self will destroy the whole project. For such a project, we have to be really ready to give it our all, without reservation, without hesitation. We have to be convinced that samsara is not a place we want to live anymore. That we've suffered enough and we've made enough stupid mistakes in our life and caused enough suffering to other people and to ourselves, that we don't need to be convinced that samsara is not our home, that we want to be part of it anymore. And we have to be ready to say goodbye to misery, duplicity, duality, small-mindedness, and so many other things. I don't really have much more to say, but I think I said most of what I intended to say. I hope it's been clear. I know I'm pointing to something way beyond what most people think about, spiritually inspired people think about. But I have no choice because this is what I'm here to do. And I know I make the same point over and over again, but that's really, I do it because I don't really have anything else to say, not really.